My name is Anna. Before I begin sharing this chapter of my life, I want to pause for just a moment. If you enjoy listening to real stories like mine, please take a second to subscribe. It truly helps me keep sharing these journeys with you. And I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop it in the comments below. It makes me feel like we're all sitting together, connected across the world, sharing our lives one story at a time. Now, let me tell you what happened after I thought I had finally begun to put my life back together. It had been almost 3 years since Daniel passed. The sharp edges of grief had softened into something quieter, something I carried with me each day but no longer let consume me. I had found new rhythms, my painting classes, afternoons at the library, evenings spent with a small circle of friends who had patiently coaxed me back into the world. I remember thinking, maybe I'm okay now, not healed. I don't think you ever fully heal from losing the love of your life, but steady. I could look at Daniel's photos without breaking down. I could laugh at silly things again. I could sit in the garden with a cup of tea and feel peace. And then life threw me another curve I never saw coming. It started so small, just little things. I was more tired than usual. At first I brushed it off. I was getting older after all. 57 wasn't young anymore. I told myself I was just working too much at the library or spending too many late nights reading, but then I noticed bruises on my arms, dark and ugly, that seemed to appear out of nowhere. My appetite slipped away. Some mornings I woke with a dull ache in my bones that lingered all day. I ignored it for weeks. That's what we do sometimes, isn't it? We tell ourselves it's nothing. We don't want to stir up fear. I thought, I've already been through enough. I can't face anything more. But my body had other plans. One afternoon in the library, I felt suddenly dizzy. The room tilted, my knees buckled, and I dropped the stack of books I was carrying. A co-worker rushed over, her eyes wide, asking if I was all right. I laughed it off, saying I just stood up too quickly. But inside, I knew something wasn't right. That evening, as I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at a plate of food I couldn't bring myself to eat, I whispered out loud, "Something's wrong with me." The next morning, I called my doctor. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. A mother with a restless toddler sat across from me, tapping on her phone. An older man coughed into his handkerchief. I sat with my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring at the floor tiles, willing the minutes to pass. When the nurse called my name, I felt my throat tighten. I told myself it was just routine. Maybe anemia, maybe stress. Nothing big. The doctor was kind, but his eyes grew serious as he looked at my blood work. He ordered more tests, then more. Each time he said the same thing. We just need to be sure. Weeks passed in a haze of appointments, needles, cold machines humming as they scanned my insides. I tried to go about my days as usual, but a cloud of dread hung over me. At night, I lay awake, staring into the dark, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to name. Finally, one crisp morning in early spring, I sat across from him in his office. His voice was gentle, but the words landed like stones in my chest. Leukemia, blood cancer. I felt everything inside me freeze. My ears buzzed, my vision narrowed. I watched his lips move, explaining treatment options, survival rates, plans for chemotherapy. But all I could think was, not again. I can't survive another blow. First Daniel, and now this. When I got home, I sank into the armchair in the living room, the same chair Daniel had used to sit in, watching his westerns. I stared at the blank television screen and whispered, "Why me? Haven't I lost enough?" For days I didn't tell anyone. I carried the diagnosis like a secret stone in my pocket, heavy and sharp. I couldn't bring myself to call Claire. I imagined her voice, panicked, worried, trying to rush home. I didn't want to put that burden on her. Not yet. But eventually the truth can't be hidden. Claire called one evening, cheerful, telling me about a new project at work. I tried to sound normal, but my voice cracked, and suddenly the words spilled out. "Claire, I'm sick." There was a long silence on the other end, then her voice trembling. "Mum, What do you mean? I told her everything. The tests, the diagnosis, the treatments they wanted to start. I tried to sound brave, but tears slid down my face, betraying me. She cried too. And then, with determination in her voice, she said, "I'm coming home. We'll get through this together." Treatment began quickly. Chemotherapy. Long hours in sterile rooms with fluorescent lights, nurses moving briskly between patients, the air filled with the sharp scent of disinfectant. The first round hit me hard. Nausea rolled over me like waves. My hair began to fall out in clumps, strands sticking to my pillow, clogging the drain. One morning I stood in the bathroom, staring at my thinning reflection. A woman I barely recognized looked back at me. Pale skin, hollow eyes, patches of scalp showing. I pressed my hands against the sink and whispered, "Is this really me?" Claire sat with me through as many treatments as she could. She brought blankets, books, sometimes just her presence, quiet but steady. She reminded me of Daniel in those early days of parenthood, rocking Claire in the night. Now it was her turn to steady me. Friends dropped off meals I could barely eat. Neighbours offered to drive me to appointments. People showed kindness. But still, there were long hours of isolation, when I lay in bed too weak to move, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. One night, after a particularly brutal round of chemo, I felt so broken I didn't know if I could go on. My body ached, my stomach churned, and despair pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Daniel, if you're there, I need you." And in the silence, I swear I felt him, not in a ghostly way, but in memory. His steady hand, his voice saying, "We'll figure it out. We always do." I clung to that. Weeks turned into months. The treatments continued. My body weakened, but somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark refused to go out. I thought of young Anna, the girl who once dreamed of painting and travelling. I thought of Claire, her bright future stretching ahead. I thought of Daniel, the life we had built, the love we had shared. I decided, I will fight. Even if I lose, I will not give up without trying. Chemotherapy became the new rhythm of my life. The weeks blurred together. Hospital visits, blood tests, IV lines taped to my arm. Each cycle felt like climbing a mountain, only to slide back down again, exhausted and aching. There were days I wanted to quit. Days I thought, what's the point of fighting if this is all life will be? I felt stripped of dignity, sick, bald, dependent. I had been proud of rebuilding myself after Daniel, proud of rediscovering life through painting and small joys. But cancer threatened to take even that away. Claire tried to be strong for me, but I saw the cracks. One night I woke to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, silently crying. She didn't know I was watching. My heart broke. She was carrying the weight of fear I thought I was hiding from her. The next morning, I told her, "Claire, you don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to be scared. I'm scared too." She looked at me with tear-filled eyes and we held each other, both trembling, both clinging to the small hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd make it through. Somewhere in those months of treatment, I began to notice the little things again. A nurse who always remembered I liked extra ice in my water. A fellow patient, a woman named Maria, who brought knitting needles and made scarves for everyone in the ward. A man who told jokes so corny they made us laugh even when we felt like death. It struck me. Here we were, a room full of people fighting battles with our own bodies, and yet there was laughter, kindness, connection. The human spirit is stubborn. Even when everything is stripped away, we still find ways to shine. One afternoon, Maria leaned over and whispered, "When I was first diagnosed, I thought my life was over. But now I see things differently. Every day I wake up, I think, this is a gift." Her words settled in my heart. I wasn't ready to call my illness a gift, not yet. But I began to wonder if there was something to learn here, something beyond the pain. there was one night that nearly broke me completely. The treatment had left my immune system weak, and I caught an infection. Fever spiked, and I ended up back in the hospital, shaking under thin blankets, my skin drenched with sweat. The doctors moved quickly, pumping me full of antibiotics, whispering urgently to one another. I remember drifting in and out of consciousness, feeling like I was standing at the edge of something vast and dark. And in that haze, I thought of Daniel. Not the moment of his death, but the years we shared before. Saturday pancakes, Sunday afternoons in the garden, his steady laugh, his hand on mine. I whispered to myself, I want more time. Please, just a little more time. And somehow, the fever broke. Slowly, my body pulled itself back from the edge. After that, something inside me shifted. I no longer thought only of surviving the treatments. I thought of living. I started keeping a notebook. Each day, no matter how small, I wrote down something I was grateful for. Some days it was simple. The sun on my face. Other days it was profound. Claire's laughter filled the kitchen tonight. I also started painting again, even in short bursts. At first my hands trembled too much to hold the brush steady, but as the weeks went on, I found myself lost in colour, in strokes of light and shadow. Painting became my rebellion, proof that cancer hadn't taken everything from me. The months stretched on. The treatments battered me, but I endured. And finally, one bright morning, my doctor sat across from me with a cautious smile. Anna, your scans look good. The cancer is in remission. Remission. The word felt fragile, like glass, as though speaking it too loudly might shatter it. I didn't leap up or cheer. Instead, I sat very still, letting it sink into my bones. For the first time in months, hope felt real. That evening, Claire and I sat on the porch together, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars prick through the dark sky. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "We made it." Tears spilled down my cheeks and I whispered back, "Yes, we did." But remission didn't mean everything went back to normal. My body was weaker. My hair grew back in patches, softer and thinner than before. Fatigue lingered. Fear lingered too. Every ache, every bruise made me wonder if it was coming back. Still, I was alive, and I promised myself I wouldn't waste that gift. I started walking in the mornings, slow at first, then farther each week. I joined a support group where others shared their own stories of survival and struggle. I laughed more, I cried openly, I let people in. For the first time since Daniel's death, I didn't just exist. I lived. The weeks after hearing the word remission were strange. You might think joy would wash over me, that I'd leap into life with unshakable gratitude. And yes, there was relief, of course. But there was also something else. A strange emptiness. Like stepping off a battlefield and realizing you don't know who you are without the fight. I had spent so many months focused on surviving each treatment, each day, each moment. Now, suddenly, the battle had paused, and I was left asking, who am I now? The first thing I did was walk into my little art room. Canvases leaned against the wall, half-finished paintings waiting for me. The room smelled faintly of paint and turpentine, like a promise. I picked up a brush with trembling fingers and stared at a blank canvas. For a long time I just stood there, tears blurring my vision. And then I began to paint. Not a flower or a landscape or a bowl of fruit. I painted what I felt. Swirling shades of deep blue, streaks of red, a bright burst of yellow in the centre. It wasn't pretty, not in the traditional sense, but it was raw, honest, alive. When I stepped back, I realised the painting looked like hope breaking through darkness. My hope. My life. Slowly, I began to re-enter the world. I returned to the library, though fewer hours than before. Patrons welcomed me back with warm smiles, some even hugging me gently. It felt good to be useful again, to be surrounded by stories, shelves filled with other people's lives, reminding me I wasn't alone in mine. I joined a cancer survivors support group. At first, I listened quietly as others shared their experiences, but eventually I began to speak too. I told them about Daniel, about losing him, about finding painting again, about the fear of my diagnosis and the fight through chemo. One woman reached for my hand afterward and whispered, "Hearing you gives me hope." That moment changed me. I realized my story wasn't just for me. Maybe it could help others too. Claire encouraged me to travel. "Mum," she said, "you always wanted to see the ocean again. Let's do it." So we did. We drove down to the coast one weekend. I stood barefoot in the sand, the wind whipping through my thinner hair, the waves crashing loud and insistent. I closed my eyes and let the salt air fill my lungs. It felt like the world was reminding me, "You're still here. Breathe, live." We laughed that weekend more than we had in years. We ate ice cream on the boardwalk, walked until our legs ached, stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. But life after illness isn't all light. There were shadows too. Nights when fear crept back in, whispering, "What if it returns? What if this was only a reprieve?" Every doctor's visit brought anxiety. Every cough, every bruise made my chest tighten. I learned to live with uncertainty, to carry it like a quiet companion. Some days it was loud, other days barely noticeable. But it was always there. And yet, so was gratitude. I found myself savouring the smallest things, the taste of warm bread fresh from the oven, the sight of morning light spilling across the kitchen floor, the laughter of children playing down the street. Things I once overlooked became treasures. I also began writing. Nothing formal, just notebooks filled with reflections, memories, bits of stories. I wrote about Daniel's pancakes, about Claire's first day of school, about the way my mother's hands smelled of flour when she baked bread. I wrote about the hospital rooms, the fear, the unexpected kindness of strangers. Writing became another form of survival, a way of making sense of everything I had endured. One afternoon at the support group, Maria, the woman who knitted scarves for everyone, leaned toward me and said, "Anna, you should share your story with more people. You have a way of speaking that makes people listen." I laughed it off at first. Who would want to hear from me? I was just an ordinary woman. But her words planted a seed. Maybe sharing my story could help others feel less alone. And so, little by little, I began to open up more. Not just in the group, but with neighbours, with friends, even with strangers. And each time I saw the same thing in their eyes: recognition, connection. Because the truth is, we all carry struggles. Mine happened to be loss and illness, but everyone has something. And when we share our stories, we remind each other that we don't have to carry them alone. Now, in the quiet evenings, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, looking at the sky streaked with sunset colours. I think about the life I've lived, the love, the loss, the battles, the small joys. I think about how fragile it all is and how precious. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. None of us do. But I do know this. I am still here. And as long as I am, I will keep living, keep painting, keep telling my story. Because sometimes surviving isn't just about staying alive. It's about finding meaning, even in the broken places. It's a strange thing to reach my late 50s and realise I was still figuring out who I wanted to be. For most of my life, my identity had been built around being Daniel's wife, Claire's mother, the dependable neighbour, the quiet librarian. When Daniel died, that identity cracked. When cancer came, it shattered again. But now, standing in remission, hair slowly growing back, body still healing but spirit alive, I felt something stirring. It was the question. What now? I didn't go searching for an answer. The answer found me. One afternoon, my doctor asked if I'd be willing to speak at a local fundraiser for cancer research. "Just share a bit of your journey," he said. "People respond to real stories." At first, I hesitated. The idea of standing in front of a crowd, all eyes on me, made my stomach twist. I was used to quiet corners, not microphones. But then I thought of Maria's words in the support group. You have a way of speaking that makes people listen, so I said yes. The night of the fundraiser, I stood behind the podium, my hands trembling. The room was filled with people in formal clothes, glasses of wine in hand, waiting politely. I cleared my throat and began. I told them about the fatigue, the fear, the moment I heard the word leukemia. I told them about Claire's tears, about losing my hair, about nearly giving up. I told them about the nurses, the laughter in the chemo ward, the painting that came out of my despair. When I finished, the room was silent. And then, applause. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind that feels like people aren't just clapping for you, but for something they see in themselves too. Afterward, strangers came up to me, tears in their eyes, saying, "Thank you. Your story. It gives me hope." That night, lying in bed, I whispered to myself, maybe this is my purpose now. From then on, opportunities began to unfold. I spoke at small community events, church gatherings, even classrooms where young nursing students sat wide-eyed, listening to what treatment felt like from the patient's perspective. Each time I was nervous. Each time I wondered if I had anything worth saying. And each time I saw the same thing, people leaning in, listening, connecting. It wasn't about being wise or extraordinary. It was about being real. Claire was my biggest cheerleader. She told me, "Mum, you don't even realize how strong you are. People need to hear it." Her pride in me became fuel for my courage. At the same time, she was building her own life, advancing in her career, exploring relationships, thinking about starting a family. Watching her bloom reminded me that life keeps moving forward, even after tragedy, even after illness. A surprising thing happened too. I began to feel less alone. Sharing my story opened doors to new friendships. Other survivors reached out, and we formed a circle of support, bound not by age or background, but by the shared experience of facing mortality and choosing to keep living anyway. We laughed together, cried together, celebrated each other's milestones. We called ourselves the stubborn ones. Stubborn enough to keep going, stubborn enough to believe in tomorrow. There were still shadows, of course. Some of the people I met in treatment didn't make it. Their absence left a heavy ache. But even in that grief, I carried their memory forward, speaking their names, honouring their fight. It reminded me that telling my story wasn't just for me, it was for them too. And then came the invitation that truly changed things. A regional conference for cancer awareness asked if I would share my journey on a larger stage. Hundreds of attendees, cameras, a wider audience than I ever imagined. The thought terrified me, but a small voice inside whispered, "Anna, you've already survived worse than stage fright. Tell them. Tell it all." So I agreed. I spent days preparing, not writing a polished speech, but simply outlining the truths I needed to say. That cancer is terrifying, that treatment is brutal, that the human spirit is more resilient than we think, that hope can be found in the smallest things, and that stories matter, because they connect us, heal us, remind us we're not alone. When the day came, I walked onto that stage with my heart pounding. The lights were blinding, the room enormous. But as soon as I began speaking, the fear melted away. Because it wasn't about me. It was about all of us. Every person who had faced loss, fear, sickness, uncertainty. And when I finished, I saw faces shining with tears. People lined up to talk to me afterward, to hug me, to thank me. One young woman whispered, "My mom was just diagnosed. Hearing you makes me believe she can get through it." That moment alone was worth every ounce of fear. When I returned home that night, I sat on the porch under the stars, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I thought of Daniel, of how proud he would have been. I thought of the woman I used to be, quiet, ordinary, afraid of change, and how she had grown into someone braver, someone who knew her voice had power. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just like a survivor, but like someone who was truly alive.